The steak knife in James's hand hovered just above his plate. The conversation had been light: wedding details, guest lists, flower arrangements. Normal, casual. Then, Deborah had dropped the bomb. "Oh, by the way, Mark will be walking Samantha down the aisle." The words sliced through the air, clean and precise, like a scalpel dissecting flesh. James didn't react at first. Years of control, of swallowing disappointments, of pushing through exhaustion for the sake of his family, had trained him well. He simply set his knife down, took a sip of his wine, and let the words settle in his mind like an echo bouncing off an empty room. Mark, walking Samantha down the aisle. His daughter. His. Not in the biological sense, maybe, but that had never mattered before. He was the one who held her tiny hand when she was afraid of the dark. The one who stayed up all night when she had the flu. The one who taught her how to parallel park, even when she almost took out a mailbox. The one who paid for her college, scraped together extra money for her first car, and never let her feel like she was anything less than his own. And now, with one offhand comment, it was as if none of it had ever happened. He forced himself to swallow, to keep his voice even. "Oh, just that. One word." Samantha didn't look up. She stabbed at her salad with a fork, as if it had personally wronged her. Deborah, on the other hand, met his gaze for the briefest second, long enough for him to see it. The guilt, the hesitation, the knowledge that this wasn't just news. This was a wound she had just opened with surgical precision. Ethan, Samantha's fiancé, shifted in his seat, clearly aware of the tension but smart enough not to comment. James didn't move. He didn't demand an explanation. He didn't slam his fist on the table or ask the one question burning through his mind. When the hell did I become just a guest at my own daughter's wedding? Instead, he smiled. A slow, measured thing. "Well," he said, reaching for his napkin. "That's certainly unexpected." Deborah let out a nervous chuckle. "It's not a big deal, James. She just thought it would be nice to honor her biological father." Honor. A funny word, considering Mark had spent exactly 0 nights soothing Samantha's nightmares, 0 hours helping her move into her first apartment, and 0 moments being a father in any way that mattered. And yet, he was the one being honored. James nodded, still eerily calm. "Of course. Makes sense." He picked up his wine glass, took a slow sip, and let the silence stretch. Samantha shifted in her seat. For the first time, she glanced up at him, but just as quickly, her gaze darted away, as if she couldn't quite stomach what she saw on his face. Ethan cleared his throat. "James, I just want you to know that we really appreciate everything you've done for Samantha. This doesn't change that." James turned to him, his expression unreadable. "Of course not. Why would it?" The younger man looked visibly relieved, not realizing that James wasn't agreeing. He was just watching, waiting, letting them all believe he was taking this like the good, quiet, obedient man they expected him to be. Deborah, emboldened by his apparent lack of protest, reached for his hand. "We just didn't want there to be any hard feelings." Hard feelings? James almost laughed. He almost let the raw, bitter amusement bubble up and spill onto the table. But he didn't. Instead, he simply nodded. "Of course. No hard feelings at all." He saw the way Deborah hesitated, her grip on his hand tightening slightly, as if she wasn't sure whether or not to believe him. And that was the first moment, the very first one, where a tiny flicker of doubt crept into her expression. "Good." James set his napkin down beside his plate and leaned back, letting his gaze drift across the table, taking them all in. Samantha still refused to meet his eyes. Ethan was stiff, nervous, unsure of his place in this silent storm. And Deborah, his wife of 27 years, was watching him with something dangerously close to suspicion. James smiled again. "Well," he said, his voice smooth, easy. "If that's what Samantha wants, then that's what she should have." The words should have felt like surrender. They weren't, because something inside him had shifted. Something dark, something sharp. They had made a decision without him. Now it was his turn. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that only comes when something irrevocable has shifted beneath the surface, when the foundation of a life has cracked in a way that no one wants to acknowledge. James sat in the dimly lit kitchen, his fingers wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee he had no intention of drinking. Deborah was upstairs, probably pretending to be asleep. Samantha had gone home with Ethan hours ago, escaping any further discussion. But James wasn't done. He waited, letting the weight of the silence settle over the house, letting it stretch long enough that he knew Deborah would be restless in bed, wondering if he was coming up. Then, finally, he pushed back his chair, the legs scraping against the floor like a drawn-out sigh, and moved to the stairs. She wasn't asleep. He knew it the second he stepped into the room. She was lying on her side, her back to him, her body stiff with the kind of stillness that only came when someone was forcing themselves to be motionless. He didn't play along. "You want to tell me what that was about?" His voice was quiet, steady, but it cut through the air like a blade. Deborah exhaled slowly, as if gathering herself. Then, finally, she rolled over and looked at him. Even in the dim light, he could see the hesitation in her face. The way she braced for this conversation. "She just wants to honor her real father," she said, like that was supposed to explain everything. James didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't give her the satisfaction of knowing that the word real had lodged itself somewhere deep inside him, a splinter beneath his ribs. "Real father," he repeated, his voice almost amused, as if testing the phrase. "That's interesting. Because last time I checked, Mark hadn't been around for the past 25 years. Deborah sighed, sitting up and running a hand through her hair. "James, don't do this." "Do what?" His tone was too calm, too measured. "Ask why my daughter, suddenly decided that I wasn't the one who should walk her down the aisle?" "She didn't mean it that way," Deborah said, rubbing her temple. "It's not a rejection." James let out a low chuckle. "Could have fooled me. She loves you," she insisted. She wanted to do something for Mark, too." James studied her. There was something beneath her words, something she wasn't saying. "This wasn't her idea," he said finally. Deborah froze. And there it was. She covered quickly, shaking her head. "Of course it was, James. She came to me with it." "Oh, you mean you came to her with it?" he corrected, his voice edged with something dangerous now. She looked away. That was all the confirmation he needed. James inhaled slowly, pressing his fingers against his temples. "How long?" Deborah hesitated. "How long what? How long have you been talking to him?" She shifted under the sheets, uncomfortable now. "James, that's not the point." "How long?" His voice was steel now. Deborah pressed her lips together. "A while," she admitted, and there it was again, that careful vagueness. That intentional lack of clarity that she thought would keep her safe. James exhaled sharply through his nose. "And you didn't think I should be involved in this decision?" Deborah had the audacity to look tired, as if he was the unreasonable one. "It's not about you, James." That hit him harder than he expected. Not because it was surprising, but because it confirmed something he had felt deep down ever since she had said the words at dinner. This wasn't about him. This decision wasn't made with him in mind. It was made for him, without his input. He stood there for a long moment, his jaw tightening, his hands flexing at his sides. Then, finally, he nodded. "Got it." Deborah frowned. "James?" But he was already turning, already walking toward the door. He didn't slam it, didn't yell, didn't say anything else. He just left. And for the first time in his marriage, Deborah didn't follow him. Samantha was easy to find. She still had the same routine, still went to the same overpriced coffee shop she'd loved since college. James waited outside, leaning against the hood of his car as she came out the next morning, her phone in her hand, mid-text. She looked up, saw him, and hesitated. That hesitation was a wound he didn't let her see. "Dad," she said, wary. James nodded toward his car. "Take a walk with me." She swallowed, glancing around like she was hoping for an excuse to say no. But in the end, she sighed and tucked her phone away. They walked in silence for a while, the sound of the city filling the space between them. Then, finally, James spoke. "I just want to hear it from you," he said quietly. Samantha hesitated. "Dad, just be honest with me," he said, stopping to face her. She bit her lip, avoiding his gaze. It's not because I don't love you. James waited. She exhaled. "I just thought it would be nice to include him, too." His jaw tightened. "You thought it would be nice?" "Yeah." She shifted uncomfortably. "I mean, you'll still be there, Dad." The words rang hollow. James let them sit between them for a moment, studying her, memorizing the way she said it, the way she couldn't even fully meet his eyes. "You really believe that?" he asked quietly. Samantha swallowed. "Yes." But there was no certainty in her voice. James nodded. "All right." That was all he said. And then he turned and walked away. That night, he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He thought about every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every night spent awake worrying about her, every sacrifice. He thought about the college tuition he had worked overtime to pay, the birthday parties, the inside jokes, the years and years of fatherhood that were now being distilled down into a hollow, meaningless phrase. "You'll still be there, Dad." And then he thought about something else. Something cold. Something calculating. They had made their choice. Now, he would make his. The ceiling fan spun in slow, rhythmic circles, casting shifting shadows against the walls. James lay on his back, unmoving, eyes fixed on a spot just above him. Sleep wasn't coming tonight. It hadn't even tried. His mind was a projector, playing a reel of memories he hadn't asked to relive. A 7-year-old Samantha, her face flushed with excitement and terror, perched on a pink bicycle with wobbly training wheels. "Okay, kiddo, you gotta trust me." He crouched beside her, one hand steadying the seat, the other resting on her tiny shoulder. "I'm not gonna let you fall. I don't want to do this anymore," she whined, gripping the handlebars like a lifeline. James chuckled. "You said you wanted to be like the big kids." She huffed but nodded. "All right then. Just pedal. I got you." The first few feet were shaky. His hands never left the bike. But then she was moving. On her own. The moment she realized it, she gasped, turning back to look at him. "Dad, I'm doing it." The front wheel jerked. The bike tipped. Samantha shrieked as she crashed onto the grass. James was there in an instant, scooping her up before the first tear could even fall. "You okay, kid?" he asked, brushing a stray leaf from her hair. Her lower lip trembled. "I don't want to ride anymore." James shook his head. "Nope. You're getting back on." "But I fell." "Yeah," he said, dusting off her knees. "And next time, you'll know how not to." Samantha sniffled, rubbing her arm. "Will you still hold on?" James smiled. "Always." The memory fractured, crumbling beneath the weight of the present. "But you didn't hold on, did you?" A voice in his head whispered. Or maybe she just let go. James inhaled sharply, but the next memory had already taken hold. She was 9, curled up on the couch, her small body wrapped in a fleece blanket. Her forehead was hot beneath his palm, her breathing shallow. The flu had hit her hard. "I don't like being sick," she murmured, eyes half-lidded. "I know, sweetheart." James adjusted the damp washcloth on her forehead, brushing a few strands of hair away from her face. "But I'm right here." "You won't go to work?" she whispered, her voice weak. James glanced at the clock. He should have left an hour ago. His boss wouldn't be happy, but he didn't care. "Nope," he said, settling in beside her. "I'm staying right here." Samantha nuzzled into his side with a small, content sigh. "I love you, Daddy." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Love you too, kid." James squeezed his eyes shut, trying to push the images away. But they kept coming. 17 years old. College applications spread across the kitchen table. Samantha sat across from him, chewing on the end of a pen. "I dunno, Dad," she groaned. "What if I don't get in anywhere?" James smirked, flipping through one of the packets. "Then I guess you'll be living in our basement forever." "Dad." "Relax, kid. You've got this. Just pick the one that excites you." Samantha sighed. "I mean, NYU seems amazing, but it's so expensive." James leaned back in his chair. "Yeah, it is." She frowned. "You're already working so much. I don't want you stressing over money because of me." James reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "That's my job, kiddo. And I promise, you're worth every damn penny." A bitter laugh rumbled in his chest. "Guess not." Every sacrifice, every late-night shift, every moment of exhaustion he had swallowed down for her, reduced to nothing more than a footnote in her story. A minor character in the life he built around her. And the worst part? She didn't even realize she had erased him. James exhaled slowly, forcing himself to sit up. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed, running a hand down his face. His fingers trembled slightly. Was it ever real? Did any of it mean what he thought it did? Or had he been living in a carefully curated illusion, one where love and duty were enough to secure a permanent place in someone's heart? His eyes flickered toward the closet. 25 years. A lifetime. And now, Mark would stand where James had always assumed he would. The real father. Something inside him went still. There was no rage. No pleading. No desperate need to explain to anyone why this was wrong. There was only a cold, razor-sharp understanding. They had made their choice. Now, he would make his. James woke before the sun, his body heavy with exhaustion, but his mind sharper than it had been in years. Clarity had found him in the silence of the night. Not the kind that came with acceptance. No, this was something colder. Something precise. He wasn't going to argue. He wasn't going to plead. He was going to act. The first call was to his lawyer. It was still early, but James knew Paul McAllister wouldn't mind. They had been friends for years, ever since Paul helped him sort out a property issue back when Samantha was a toddler. James had called in very few favors over the years, but today? Today was different. The phone rang twice before Paul picked up, his voice groggy. Jesus, James. It's barely 6. Paul, James said, his tone even. I need to talk. That was all it took. Something in his voice must have cut through the fog of sleep because Paul sighed, already waking up. What's going on? James glanced at Deborah, still asleep beside him. He got up, moving into the hallway. Hypothetically, he said, his voice lower now, if a man wanted to reassess certain financial commitments, say, future investments in someone else's life, what would be the best way to do that? There was a pause. Then Paul's tone shifted. James, what's happening? James smiled, though there was nothing warm in it. Just a hypothetical. Paul sighed. Hypothetically speaking, are we talking about a business investment or something a little more personal? Let's say personal. All right, Paul said slowly. Well, depends on the specifics. Are we talking about inheritance? Trust funds? Ongoing financial support? James exhaled. All of the above. Another pause. I assume this has something to do with your daughter's wedding. James didn't respond. Paul sighed again, but this time, it wasn't exasperation, it was understanding. All right. Come by the office this afternoon. I'll clear my schedule. James nodded once. Appreciate it, Paul. He ended the call, staring out the window. The sky was still a dull gray, the world just beginning to stir. One step down. Now, the second call. This one, he had debated. But the longer he thought about it, the more necessary it became. He scrolled through his contacts, found the number, and pressed call. It rang. Once. Twice. Then a voice answered, surprised. James? James smiled, just a ghost of one. Hey, Mark. We should talk. By the time he came downstairs for breakfast, the mask was firmly in place. Deborah was already at the table, nursing a cup of coffee, scrolling through her phone. She barely glanced up when he entered. Morning, she said casually, as if everything was normal. James kissed her on the cheek, lingering just long enough that she glanced at him. Her eyes flickered with something, hesitation? Suspicion? Good. He poured himself a cup of coffee, sitting across from her. How's the wedding planning coming along? Deborah blinked. The question caught her off guard. Fine. She hesitated. You're okay. James took a sip, letting the silence stretch just long enough. Then he nodded. Yeah. I mean, if this is what Samantha wants, then that's all that matters, right? Deborah studied him now, her fingers tightening slightly around her mug. Right, she echoed, but there was doubt in her voice. James smiled, warm and easy. Then he reached for the wedding invitation sitting on the counter, running his fingers over the embossed lettering. Big day's coming fast, he mused. Should be a moment to remember. Deborah didn't respond, but James saw the way her shoulders tensed. She knew. Something was coming. She just didn't know what. The church was buzzing with quiet excitement. Rows of white chairs lined the aisle, soft candlelight flickering along the pews, casting warm shadows across the vaulted ceiling. Laughter and polite conversation filled the space as the wedding rehearsal unfolded like a carefully orchestrated performance. James stood near the back, unnoticed. Mark was at the front, standing exactly where James should have been, where James was supposed to be. Samantha stood beside him, smiling. Carefree. She looked happy. And why wouldn't she? This was her decision. James watched as the officiant cleared his throat, signaling for everyone to settle. All right, let's run through it from the top. The soft notes of the processional music hummed from a nearby speaker. The bridal party lined up. Then, the doors at the back of the church opened, and Samantha's arm linked with Mark's. James barely blinked as he watched them move down the aisle together. He thought it would sting, but it didn't. It didn't burn the way he expected, didn't claw at his ribs like it should have. Instead, there was something else. Something colder. Mark walked with practiced ease, shoulders squared, playing the part of the devoted father like he had earned it, like he deserved it. James could almost laugh. This was a man who had been absent for 25 years. A man who had never once picked up the phone for Samantha's birthdays, had never shown up for her recitals, had never sat through tearful heartbreaks or cheered her on at graduation. And now, in a perfectly tailored suit, Mark got to play the hero. James folded his arms, leaning against the wall, perfectly still. No one noticed him. No one was looking for him. They were all focused on the couple, on the performance unfolding before them. But there was one person who did notice. Deborah. She stood a few rows ahead, her back rigid. James saw the way she turned her head ever so slightly, her gaze flickering toward him. Her expression was unreadable, but he caught it. The hesitation. The uncertainty. For the first time since that dinner, she didn't look sure. James held her gaze. And then he smiled. Not a wide grin. Not forced. Just a slow, knowing curve of his lips. A silent message. You feel it, don't you? Something's off. You just don't know what yet. Deborah's throat bobbed as she swallowed. She turned back toward the aisle, trying to focus. Mark and Samantha reached the front. The officiant continued, explaining the order of events, how everything would flow on the real day. James didn't listen. He simply watched. Everyone was playing their part. Everyone was comfortable in their little roles. And not a single one of them had any idea what was coming. James exhaled slowly, adjusting the cuffs of his sleeves. Just a few more days. Then, the real performance would begin. James woke before the sun. The house was silent, but not peaceful. There was an edge to the stillness, like the charged air before a storm. He moved through his morning routine without rush, without hesitation. Showered, shaved, dressed in a crisp suit. Everything about him was composed, effortless. There was no anger in his movements, no tension in his shoulders. But beneath the surface, something sharp and glacial had settled in his chest. Today was the day. Downstairs, the house hummed with activity. Deborah was already moving through the kitchen, talking on the phone, coordinating last-minute details. Her voice was upbeat, but James didn't miss the way she glanced at him when he walked in. She had been watching him ever since the rehearsal. Waiting. For what? She didn't know. But she felt it. James poured himself a cup of coffee, sipping it slowly as he leaned against the counter. He let her watch. Let her feel the weight of something unspoken. Then, finally, he spoke. I got something for Samantha. Deborah blinked, thrown off. What? James nodded toward the small, neatly wrapped package sitting on the table. Just a plain white box. No frills. No extravagance. Just something personal. Deborah set her phone down, studying him carefully. James. He lifted a brow. Something wrong. She hesitated. Then, finally, she shook her head. No, of course not. But she was lying. She just didn't know why yet. Samantha arrived at the house an hour later, wrapped in a silk robe, her hair half-pinned as the makeup artist fussed over her. She looked radiant. She looked happy. And, for the first time, James wasn't sure if that hurt or not. She spotted him and smiled, though it was hesitant. Hey, Dad. Dad. Not James. Not oh. By the way, Mark is walking me down the aisle. Just Dad. Like nothing had changed. James returned the smile. Got something for you. Samantha's brows lifted as he handed her the small box. Oh. She took it carefully, glancing between him and Deborah. James gave nothing away. Deborah, on the other hand, was frozen, watching, waiting. Samantha hesitated, then unwrapped it. Inside, nestled against soft velvet, was a folded piece of paper. Her lips parted slightly, confused. What is? James tilted his head. Read it. Deborah took a step closer now, no longer pretending to be indifferent. Samantha unfolded the note. Her eyes flicked over the words. And then, she stopped breathing. James saw it. The way her fingers trembled. the way color drained just slightly from her cheeks. For a moment, the room was utterly silent. Then, finally, Samantha lifted her eyes to his. "Dad," she whispered. Her voice was different now. James smiled. "Slow. Steady." "I meant what I said," he murmured. Samantha swallowed hard, her hands tightening around the letter. "But you—" James reached out, squeezing her shoulder gently. "It's your big day, kiddo. Make sure it's one to remember." And with that, he stepped back. Deborah's voice finally broke through the silence, sharp with something between panic and suspicion. "James, what did you give her?" James turned to her, his expression unreadable. Just a little something to honor the moment. Then, without another word, he walked away. Deborah didn't chase after him. She was too busy watching Samantha, watching the way her daughter gripped the letter like it was burning, the way her expression shifted from shock to something dangerously close to realization. Something had changed, and it was only the beginning. The music began. A soft, elegant swell of strings filled the air, rippling through the grand cathedral like a tide pulling everything toward the inevitable. The guests rose, turning in unison toward the double doors at the back. The anticipation was electric, thick with quiet murmurs and shuffling feet. The bride was coming, and at the very last row, near the entrance, James stood still, motionless, expressionless, watching. The doors opened. Samantha stepped through, glowing in soft ivory, her veil cascading down her back like a river of light. A vision of perfection, a moment she had likely dreamed of since she was a little girl. And beside her, arm in arm, was Mark. Mark, the real father. James let the thought roll through his mind, but it didn't sting anymore. It was almost amusing now. Mark walked with his shoulders squared, his chin lifted with quiet pride, as if he had earned this moment. As if 25 years of absence could be undone by this single, ridiculous performance. James let his gaze track their movements, slow and measured. Samantha's expression was bright, almost giddy, but not entirely. There was something beneath it. A shadow, a hesitation. And James knew exactly when it happened, the moment she saw him. From her place at the front of the room, her eyes flickered toward where he stood. James didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't smile. He simply watched. For the first time, she faltered. Just slightly. Barely perceptible, but James caught it. The way her fingers tensed against Mark's sleeve. The way her breath hitched ever so slightly. Something had shifted. Something was wrong. Mark, of course, didn't notice. He was too busy basking in his moment of triumph, drinking in the admiring glances from guests who only knew the surface-level story. James could feel their eyes on him, too. Some guests stole quick glances in his direction, expecting something. A flash of anger, a grimace of pain, a clenched jaw, something. But James gave them nothing. He simply stood there, hands loosely clasped in front of him, perfectly calm. The performance continued. Step by step, Mark led Samantha down the aisle. James barely heard the hushed whispers, barely noticed the soft gasps of admiration from the crowd. Because he wasn't listening to them. He was watching her. The way she clutched that bouquet just a little too tightly. The way her smile wavered, just for a second, as she neared the altar. He saw it now. The weight of the note he had given her that morning. The words he had chosen carefully, deliberately. She had read them. And now, as she walked toward a future she thought was secure, she was beginning to understand. The foundation beneath her was cracking. She just didn't know how fast it was about to crumble. James exhaled slowly, his lips barely curving. No outbursts. No scene. No begging for recognition. Just watching. Waiting. Because the moment was coming. And when it did, they would never forget it. The hush in the room was sacred. Samantha and Ethan stood before the officiant, hands gently clasped, exchanging soft glances. The guests, draped in their finest attire, watched with eager anticipation. It was the moment before the vows, the moment that solidified everything. James moved. Deliberate. Unhurried. Not a single guest noticed at first. Not until the slow click of his polished shoes against the marble floor broke through the silence. Heads turned. The officiant, mid-sentence, faltered. Mark stiffened, his face twisting in confusion. And Samantha froze. James stepped forward until he was standing just a few feet from the altar. Not at the center, not making a spectacle. Just present. A ghost finally stepping into the light. Every muscle in Deborah's body went rigid. From her seat in the front row, her breath hitched audibly. She knew. She had always known. James didn't look at her. Didn't look at Mark. Didn't even look at the guests, who were now exchanging wide-eyed glances, confusion creeping up their perfectly rehearsed expressions. He looked only at Samantha. And then, "Before we continue," James said, his voice low, steady, deliberate, "there's something I need to say." A ripple of unease passed through the room. The officiant hesitated, glancing toward Ethan, then Samantha, then Mark, uncertain whether to intervene. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught between his instincts and decorum. Deborah moved first. She rose halfway from her seat, her lips parting. "James, don't." But he ignored her. Because this moment? This wasn't for her. Samantha's fingers curled around her bouquet, knuckles paling. "Dad." Her voice was barely above a whisper. James lifted a hand slightly, a quiet reassurance. No theatrics. No anger. Just the truth. "I won't take much of your time," he said, his gaze unwavering. "I just think, before these vows are spoken, before we seal this moment forever, there's something everyone here should know." Mark exhaled sharply, stepping forward. "James, this isn't the time." James turned his head, meeting Mark's gaze for the first time in years. And for the first time, Mark hesitated. Because James wasn't angry. He wasn't here to fight. He was in control. The guests murmured now, whispers rippling through the room like a slow-building tide. Deborah's nails dug into the back of the pew, her entire body rigid. Samantha swallowed hard, her breath quickening. "Dad, please don't ruin this." James tilted his head slightly. "Ruin it?" The question hung in the air, just a whisper softer than the tension vibrating through the room. And then, a smile. Slow. Measured. "I wouldn't dream of it." The silence was suffocating now. Everyone was waiting. Waiting for the moment that would change everything. And James? He was ready to give it to them. James let the silence stretch. Let it sink in. Every eye in the room was on him now. Even the officiant, who had likely seen every kind of wedding mishap imaginable, stood frozen, his script forgotten in his trembling hands. Mark looked irritated, shifting uncomfortably, but he wasn't worried. Not yet. He still thought this was just a bitter ex-husband making a last-minute scene. Deborah, however, Deborah knew. She wasn't breathing. Her hands were clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone bone-white. And Samantha, his daughter, his child, stood there, bouquet trembling in her grip, looking at him like she was afraid of what he might say next. Good. They should all be afraid. James let out a breath. "You're right, kid." His voice was calm, measured, almost soft. "Blood does matter." Samantha's brows pulled together. "Dad, what are you?" He reached into his pocket. Slow, deliberate, and pulled out an envelope. Deborah visibly flinched. The room tensed. Samantha's breath caught in her throat. James held the envelope up between his fingers, giving it a little flick. The crisp paper made a soft snapping sound in the stillness. Mark let out a scoff, rolling his eyes. "Oh, for God's sake, James. What is this?" "A letter about how you've been wronged." He turned to the officiant. "This is ridiculous. We don't have to." James ignored him. Instead, he looked only at Samantha. And then, he opened the envelope. He unfolded the papers inside, smoothing them out with practiced ease. A single sheet. Plain. Clinical. The kind of thing that carried weight. The kind of thing that changed everything. Then, he lifted his gaze and met his daughter's eyes. "This," he said, his voice just loud enough to carry, "is a DNA test." The murmurs started in the back of the room. A few heads turned. A few sharp inhales echoed through the space. Samantha's face twisted in confusion. "What?" James didn't let her finish. He turned the page outward, facing the crowd, showing them. Then, he spoke again, voice steady, unshaken. "It says I'm your biological father." Silence. Heavy. Crushing. A vacuum that sucked every ounce of air from the room. Deborah gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. Samantha blinked rapidly, staring at him like he had just spoken in a foreign language. "What?" Mark's expression shattered. His bravado crumbled instantly, his confidence replaced with something ugly, something confused and panicked. James tilted his head, watching Mark carefully, savoring the way realization dawned on his stupid, clueless face. "You heard me," James said, his voice dripping with quiet finality. "I'm her father, not you." The guests exploded. The whispers turned into frantic gasps, guests turning to each other in shock, hands flying to mouths. The officiant took a step back, his face pale. Deborah, who had spent a lifetime controlling narratives, who had spent decades ensuring she was always one step ahead, looked as if she had just been exposed to the world. And in a way, she had. Because now, everyone knew. Every guest, every friend, every relative. The carefully constructed lie she had upheld for 25 years had just collapsed in front of an entire audience. Samantha staggered back a step, shaking her head. That can't. James just held her gaze. He didn't need to say anything else. She had the truth now, and the truth would destroy everything. The silence was unbearable, the kind that didn't just fill a room, it drowned it. The guests, once murmuring, now sat frozen in their seats, eyes darting between James, Samantha, and Deborah, waiting for someone to explain. Samantha's hands trembled around the bouquet. Her face was a mask of confusion, disbelief, and something else. Something deep, something raw, something she didn't even understand yet. James watched as she tried to process it, tried to reject it. He could see the gears turning, the way she wanted to tell herself this was a mistake, a cruel joke, a lie. But the problem was, the only lie in the room had just been exposed. What? Samantha's voice cracked. Her gaze flicked wildly between him and Deborah. That doesn't make sense. James inhaled slowly, exhaled even slower. He kept his voice steady, low, unshaken. "Funny thing, though," he murmured. "This test says, I'm actually your biological father." Deborah visibly wavered. Her face drained of color, her body stiff as if she were bracing for impact. James turned to her, tilting his head slightly, watching her like a predator watches prey. "This is the part where you explain, Deborah," he said calmly. "Go on. Tell her." Deborah's lips parted, but no words came. Samantha's breathing turned shallow, uneven. "Mom." Deborah's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. She turned to Samantha, eyes pleading, mouth opening and closing as if she could somehow rewrite the last 30 seconds. "Sweetheart, it's..." James cut in, voice sharp. "It's what, Deborah?" She flinched. The tension in the air was suffocating. Samantha shook her head wildly, her hands gripping the bouquet like a lifeline. No, this isn't. Dad, this can't be." James just held her gaze, unmoving, waiting, letting the truth sink into her bones. Samantha whipped toward Deborah, her voice rising, cracking. "Tell me he's lying." Deborah looked desperate now. "Sweetheart, Tell me." A pause. A horrible, deafening pause. And then, Deborah broke. Her voice wavered, barely above a whisper. "I thought it was for the best. Thought it was for the best." James let out a soft, humorless chuckle. "There it is." Samantha stumbled back a step, her face twisting. "You thought." She let out a strangled sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Mom, what the hell does that mean?" Deborah reached for her. "Baby, please." Samantha yanked away. "Don't touch me." Her voice rang through the church, sharp, shattered. The guests sat in stunned silence, frozen in the wreckage of a wedding that had just turned into a funeral for the truth. James tilted his head, watching as it all sank in for his daughter. The childhood she had built in her head. The man she thought was her father. The choices she had made, all based on a lie. Samantha's breaths came fast and shallow, panic creeping into her expression. No, this isn't real. This can't be real." James simply exhaled. "It is, kid." Mark, who had been silent through all of this, finally stepped forward, voice shaking. This is bullshit." James turned to him, cutting him down with just a look. "You really want to insert yourself into this right now?" Mark's mouth snapped shut. He had nothing, because James had everything. Samantha let out a hollow laugh, one that didn't belong to a bride on her wedding day. I don't understand." "How?" James watched her. Then, finally, he gave her the truth. "Your mother lied to me," he said simply. She lied to you. For 25 years. The weight of it crashed over Samantha like a wave. And for the first time in James's life, she looked at him like a stranger. Mark was the first to break the silence. What the hell is going on? His voice cracked through the air, loud, bewildered, but under the surface was something more. Fear. Because he didn't understand. Because for the first time, he wasn't in control of the story. James turned to him, slow and deliberate, his expression unreadable. Then, with a voice so calm it made the tension unbearable, he said, "You were never her father." Mark flinched. James let the words settle, let them sting. You were just a convenient lie. The air shifted. It was no longer a wedding. It was a crime scene. Gasps rippled through the pews. Guests leaned in, whispers spreading like wildfire. The father of the bride, not the father. The man she called Dad for 25 years, the real father. Deborah's head snapped up. James, stop. James held up a hand, silencing her instantly. Oh, no, he said smoothly. I'll let you explain that part. And just like that, every single pair of eyes turned to her. Pinned. Exposed. Cornered. Deborah's throat bobbed, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. Samantha, his daughter, his real daughter, stumbled back, her hands shaking violently. This isn't real, she whispered, her voice hoarse. This can't be real. Her entire world was collapsing right in front of her. Everything she had believed, every bedtime story, every childhood moment, every decision she had ever made. A lie. A fabricated history built on her mother's deception. Deborah swallowed hard, turning to Samantha, her voice desperate now. Samantha, sweetheart, I can explain. Samantha backed away. Explain. She let out a short, disbelieving laugh, one that sounded more like a sob. You lied to me. For my entire life. Deborah reached for her. Honey, please. Samantha jerked away. Don't. Her voice was shaking. Just don't. Mark took a stumbling step forward, looking between them like he was the only one who hadn't gotten the script. This is insane, he muttered. This has to be a mistake. James exhaled sharply, almost amused. You're confused, he said, tilting his head. That's fair. But let's make it simple for you. He took a step closer, lowering his voice just enough that every word landed like a hammer. She was never yours. Mark's lips parted. James leaned in just slightly. She was never yours. Mark staggered back as if he had been hit. The room erupted. Guests gasped. Someone in the back muttered, "Oh my God." The officiant looked like he wanted to run. And Deborah? Deborah just stood there. Silent. Helpless. Exposed. For the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. James watched Samantha, watched the way her breath quickened, the way her chest rose and fell like she was barely holding herself together. She had lost something she could never get back. Not just the father she thought she had, but the mother she trusted. And James? He had nothing left to give, nothing left to say, because the truth had already destroyed everything. James stood still for a moment longer, watching it all come undone. The perfect wedding, the perfect family, the perfect illusion shattered. Mark stood there, stunned into silence, his entire world yanked out from under him. The man had spent decades believing he had a daughter, playing the absentee father just enough to keep his conscience clean. And now? He wasn't even that. Deborah was frozen, her face hollow with shock. For the first time in her life, she had no control over the narrative. She had spent 25 years carefully crafting her reality, spinning the perfect lie, keeping every thread of deception in place. And now, in front of everyone, it had unraveled. But James wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at Samantha, his daughter, his real daughter. She stood in the center of the chaos, trembling, her bouquet forgotten on the floor. The world around her had collapsed, and she looked so small, so lost, so utterly wrecked. Tears clung to her lashes. Her lips parted, but no words came. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to say it. James took a slow breath. And then finally, he spoke. I would have walked you down that aisle no matter what, he said, his voice even. I did it every day of your life. Samantha let out a soft, broken noise, like she was barely holding herself together. James just held her gaze. Steady, unwavering. But today, he tilted his head slightly. Today, I let someone else do it. The words landed like a strike, soft but devastating. Because I wanted you to see the difference. Samantha let out a shaky exhale, her eyes burning. Dad, James didn't wait. Didn't need to hear it. Because this wasn't about apologies. This wasn't about fixing anything. It was about truth. And now she knew. That was enough. So James turned. Without another word, without a glance back, he walked down the aisle, not toward a future that had been stolen from him, but toward something better. Something free. Behind him, the wedding crumbled. The guests didn't know whether to sit or leave. Some whispered, some gawked. Some simply watched him go. Deborah collapsed into a chair, face pale, utterly humiliated. Mark stood there, a fool who had just realized he was nothing more than a prop. And Samantha stood alone, tears streaming down her face. But James? James walked through the doors, stepped into the crisp afternoon air, breathed in deep, and smiled. Because for the first time in 25 years, he was done.